And with that, we are live. What is happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and we're back for another edition of the Astro Weather. It is the first day of August, 2023. We are. Oh, I have to mute that. Where's that coming from? Where is that coming from? Normally, oh, I know. It's coming from YouTube. That's where it's coming from. There we go. You do that. All right. Okay. So we had a little time in chat this morning, and hope everybody is having a fantastic start to their day. And wherever you are in the world, in the grand schema, I hope it's been productive and meaningful. Some days you don't always hit the mark, right? There's some days that are just days, and then there are other days that are, well, they're days, and then there are other days that are days, right? And it's all part of our wonderful experience here in this realm where it's getting hotter and stranger with every passing day. And we're going to get into it today. We are definitely going to get it. I wonder if the amount of heat and uh, ultraviolet light and gamma rays are proportionate to people's experiences. Question mark. So we got this Aquarian moon, and I was checking it out last night. I took a couple of pictures. I have to say it was pretty significant. We're very close. We were like 2 days away from having a blue moon because we had a full moon not long ago. I'm sorry, a new moon not long ago in well, I guess it wouldn't be a blue moon, would it? No, but it was close. It was close to being a blue moon. With when you have, well, could we have it this month? Two full moons this month. I'd have to check later on in the month. Anyway, we just came off of the uh, the new moon in Cancer, right, which was different because we're at the end of the Cancer cycle, and then we're moving into this full moon in Aquarius. So it's an interesting kind of beginning and culmination because Cancer and Aquarius are two very very different energies. They're in astrology they represent a quincunx, right? They don't really have anything to do with each other. So a lot of people are intentional when it comes to the new moon and sort of sowing the seeds of their intention with the new moon. If you follow these lunar cycles, and I think that this full moon grows strange fruit. That's what I think, right? Because you're starting off with, it's not it's not it's just a different lunar cycle. It's not like you're starting off with the new moon in Leo and then you're moving into the full moon in Aquarius, which is generally how it would work, right? So there's this interesting kind of um, opposition between organic and inorganic. That's how I view the Aquarius moon. And Aquarius in general, in a lot of ways, is inorganic. And Cancer is the epitome of organic. So this is interesting. Like, whatever you started off basically 2 weeks ago, intentionally or unintentionally, if that's the case, the fruition of it is going to be unusual. It'll be an unusual fruition. Um, I don't know. I guess if you're into like hybridization and cuttings and things like that, and you're somehow doing something in the heat of the summer where you're trying to bring two things together that are not necessarily um, known for pairing up. Um, this is one of those months where you might be able to get away with it. But that's just in terms of agriculture, botany, etc. It's interesting. I'm sitting across from a big cornfield over here. It's about 45 acres of deer corn, and the season started off really, really well. We had just an incredible amount of rain, like more rain than we'd had in maybe the last year and a half, 2 years total, during the early months of spring. So roughly from March to May, we had a ton of water, and it was really great for the genetically modified cornfield across from me. But what's interesting is that yesterday on the full moon, they were harvesting this corn, right? I mean, but they were doing it in a way that was, it was almost like they were like threshing this thing and creating almost like a corn meal or corn dust from the stalk from whatever ears of corn that were still on the on the corn plants. Everything was just getting processed, and it was on a full moon, right? And the way that they were doing it was really technological in a lot of ways. You didn't have people out there, pulling off, the different ears of corn. It was just being processed en masse, right? So in a lot of ways, it really did kind of cohere with the Aquarian moon. But I also feel like they probably had to harvest it before its time. Usually, if you're following the corn cycle, right? Like it's going deeper into August, and they're having larger plants and larger yield. But I think they made a judgment call here, and they're just processing it differently, and it's kind of like a materialization of what I was talking about, and how everything started off. If you go back into the springtime, which is a lot like the Cancer moon in a lot of ways, right? Like you want to do your planting then, but the reaping is different, right? So we're looking at a kind of a different sort of reaping with the energies today, and things aren't always how they appear to be, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So if your full moon uh, harvest, as it were, in your own life looks unusual or different, just kind of go with it, right? Make Because this is what these guys are doing. They're making the best of a shortened season, and they've got some kind of, I would say, technological adaptation that they're working out here. So there's that moon in Aquarius right there, and this is for the time of day, which is 8 a.m. of course, Austin time. Not quite completely full. We'll see that full moon just a little bit later in the day, opposite at 9 degrees. So here we go. Um, this uh, this part of the sun is getting ready to move into the second decan. So this is really sort of first pecan. We have pecans here. First decan sun, and really first decan moon here. And once we go through, so tomorrow when the sun is at 10, and of course the moon will be much further down its kind of evolutionary arc, it'll be second decan Sagittarius, right? So this is an interesting sort of push me pull you emotional kind of wave, right? Because at the beginning, so Leo, of course, is really bound up in identity, identity and self and pride and all the things that we associate with Leo. And right on the cusp of Sagittarius, it's moving into kind of more of a philosophical um, sort of departure in some ways. Sagittarius looks down on Leo and sees Leo for what it is, what it does, what it isn't, and has a much more kind of philosophical take on the self, which is what Sagittarius is here to do, right? So we're moving from that first decan to the second decan, right on this full moon. So by the time we reconvene here tomorrow, um, there's really kind of a higher perspective that you can begin to view your life at, or view your life with, as the sun moves into that second decan. And the good thing about the moon in Aquarius is that it allows the individual to have some, um, well, since it's a full moon, we'll call it outrospection versus introspection. right? Atrospection or exposition. And it was really interesting last night, taking a little bit of a detour here, which I do sometimes. Last night, RFK Jr. was on with Jimmy Dore. And I think Jimmy Dore I think he's a Leo. I think he just had his birthday the other day. He has the same birthday as Carl Jung and Stanley Kubrick, if I'm not mistaken. And it was really interesting. It was. I'm gonna talk more about the RFK interview tomorrow on 15 Minutes of Flame with a special guest. And it was very revealing. It was like, RFK Jr., I think for that audience, was hitting all the wrong notes with Israel, all the wrong notes. And it was at times almost cringy what was going on. And I'm like, is this the byproduct of the Aquarian moon? And is this kind of this outrospection, meaning that RFK Jr.'s internal wiring and how he feels about particular subjects, including Israel, was exposed, right? It was out there in the world. In Aquarius, it was in an environment like the internet, right? And Jimmy Dore's live show. And it was all out there for everybody to see. So I think kind of the fallout of this and his interview on Jimmy Dore is you'll see this over the next 24 hours. It's definitely worth talking about. I'm not going to get into it right now because obviously I'm getting into the chart. But again, with that moon out, in Aquarius, you can kind of look at yourself and your situation in a more detached kind of fashion. And the Aquarian moon, as I've mentioned before, is pretty voyeuristic. Like, it likes to watch. That's the nature of the Aquarian moon. So observation skills are at a kind of a peak here with the Aquarian full moon. It's like you get the illumination, but you also get the emotional distance. And meanwhile, over here with the sun in Leo, we're just right on that cusp of moving from self-possession to, in some regard, self-examination. But with Sagittarius, the self is always examined against the larger picture, whether it's politics or law or culture in general, right? So it's a very interesting day. It's kind of a pivot day. The moon is pivoting into fullness. The sun is getting ready to pivot into the next decan. And then, even yesterday, that moon was coming off of the conjunction with Pluto in Capricorn, and RFK Jr. is a Capricorn. So it was a really interesting exposition of astrology in real time and I had no idea that he was going to be on Jimmy Dore's show. And I saw it, and I came back later in the show to catch his very strange justification of what happens in the Middle East. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. All right, the trifecta. Wow. Sorry about that. Let's talk Jupiter, and to a lesser extent tomorrow. The moon moves into more of a square with Uranus. So even though we have this kind of detached Aquarian moon that allows us to look at ourselves and our emotional content with a lot more distance, the Jupiter square makes it bigger, right? And if you're not aware, if you're not sort of kind of viewing, how you process your emotions externally, we're not talking internally, right? Like new moon, balsamic moon, that's much more internal. This is definitely external. So this Jupiter square can make that even bigger. It's going to get your attention. And I think it's an interesting dynamic between self-awareness and I think sometimes with the Jupiter squares you can go a little bit blind, right? And Jupiter, of course, is the ruler of Sagittarius, and it's the ruler of the second decan. So I also feel like there can be some moral justification. Again, we watched that last night with RFK, right? Like there's this moral justification as to, and you can be very detached in a lot of ways with this moral justification. In some ways, I would say it would be kind of borderline, um, could be borderline sociopathic. Like how sociopaths always double down. They're always doubling down, tripling down, and they don't really care. And that the Jupiter square to the moon in Aquarius, which again tends to be much more detached and voyeuristic and uh, kind of self-observational, right? That Jupiter square can bring in a lot of justification for why you feel a certain way, or why your emotional attitudes are so important. The other side, though, with the Jupiter square to the moon, is that it can humanize that really kind of ivory tower, 40,000 or 20,000 foot view with kind of everything that's going on, sort of in your life and in the world in general. The Jupiter in Taurus is going to demand that you kind of ground things as well, right? So it's a really interesting day in that regard. The sun is coming into a square with Jupiter. I don't think this T square is that bad. When I look across at the 45-acre cornfield that's just been harvested, with this Jupiter T square to the moon and the sun, it brings up a phrase from, I think it's the Little Big Man, if I'm not mistaken. Does it grow corn? Does it grow corn? It's a famous Indian saying, right? Which is like, yeah, it's a great idea, but does it work? Will it bring nutrition and subsistence, sustenance to you and the people around you? That's the bigger question. And I think with this Jupiter T square to the sun and the moon, that's a big question. Right? You can go out into all the abstraction and introspection of the Aquarian moon that you want, and you can be dead set on what's right with the Leo sun. But Jupiter said, will ask you, does it grow corn? Is your attitude or your belief system or your practice or your self-identification or non-identification, as it were, with the Aquarian moon, does it work? Does it work for you? Is it adding to your life? And I think these are important questions to ask, and really to be completely self-aware. You get into a Saturn square, and you'll ask the same questions, but what's available becomes much more limiting. But with the Jupiter square, you can ask the questions, and there's the what if, right? There's, well, what if? I'm not sure if it does, but what if I did this, if I did X or I did Y? Maybe that's the adjustment that I need in my life right now. And I feel like that's a pretty good exposition of the energy. The challenge with the Jupiter T square can be also, if you're not asking those questions, you can be really haughty and nobody can tell you what to do or what to feel or what to think. And you're just extremely determined that, your identity and your emotional content are unimpeachable, right? And that's the downside with the Jupiter T square, that you just feel like, you're kind of running around with body armor on, and nobody can, nobody can assail your identity, or nobody can assail your uh, personal or political views. So it's an interesting full moon for sure because of where it started and how it's beginning to manifest. And that's just part of today's story. Of course, we have Venus retrograde. We have Mercury retrograde. Look at that. We got a lot of retrograde in the stars. We have Neptune. We have Pluto. We have Saturn. We have Venus, and we have Mercury. It looks like Uranus went retrograde as well. So it's a retrograde party. The only planets on our retrograde are Jupiter and Mars. Right? We don't count the sun or the moon. They're always moving forward. It's a lot of retrograde in the sky. Let me just say it's okay to make mistakes. Right? Nobody's perfect. And especially with that kind of, middle age, Middle Ages, Mars and Virgo, Crusader energy. Nobody's perfect. So with all these oppositions and retrogrades and squares, that's the other part of this Jupiter square to the sun and the moon. If you fall down, you can pick yourself back up. So you know what? Not perfect. Not perfect. I'll tell you though, this Mars Jupiter trine is money, right? This Mars Jupiter trine right here. Like I got up early. I got so much done today. Programmed the show, programmed the next show. I was feeling it, right? So this is a good day to be productive. Don't try not to get too caught up in trying to mediate other people's dramas too, because you'll see that with this moon in Aquarius. You'll have, whenever the sun is in Leo, we get drama. I mean, look at what's going on with Joe Biden, Hunter Biden. Look, there's big drama there. I'm going to talk about that on 15 Minutes of Flame. So that at least the Aquarian moon can have you step back a little bit. But I would say this is one of those days where you keep your head down and you work. Right? You'll get a lot done today. I mean, we've got it almost an exact trine with Mars and Jupiter. So work your ass off today because your efforts will pay off. They'll totally pay off. What you want to do now, like again, is we'll use this kind of cyclic process here. So we'll look at Mars and Virgo, and you want to look long term, right? Long term in the Mars cycle. So in the Mars cycle, as it relates to Jupiter, we'll have that opposition when Mars goes into Scorpio. I believe it's later this year. And you'll get to check on your efforts, right? And then next year, when Mars moves into Capricorn, comes back again, and what will it do? It'll start to trine Jupiter. So we're in an interesting Mars cycle, right? So what you want to do now is you want to put the hard work in now, and then by the time we get here, you want to reap the benefits. And in Mars and Scorpio, you get to check. You get to check on how well you're doing, right? I like Mars and Scorpio. You can make some very deep adjustments to what you're literally doing today, right now. So in our society, we tend to think very short term, on demand. Everything's on demand. But if we can step back a little bit and look at this greater Mars cycle here, and that what you're working on, initiating and putting your hard work and effort into today, that when Mars moves into Capricorn, that's the payoff, right? That is the payoff. So whatever you're doing today is not for naught. Just trust me on that. Trust me. Okay. So that's a really great application of the energy. I could probably spend another half hour to 45 minutes just talking about these retrogrades because they're abundant, absolutely abundant. I think the Yod is worth looking at here because it also has Venus in the retrograde position, in conjunct Neptune, in conjunct Pluto, and I feel like there's some reevaluating going on just in terms of contracts, relationships, and we talked about this on Sunday night. Like, what do you love? What are you passionate about? And the Neptune in conjunct with Venus can be kind of a bit of an existential crisis when it comes to your passion. And the Pluto in conjunct in the retrograde, it could be also connected to trying to find something that you've been passionate about in the past and resurrecting that and moving forward. It's interesting energy. And tomorrow I think we'll still be at the kind of the outer end of the Yod with Venus at 25. I think it'll still connect in with that 3-degree orbit Pluto. So it's really about a 24-hour cycle. We'll have the in conjunct with Neptune a little bit longer because Neptune's at 2736 and Venus could go back to basically 24. So we'll have more Venus in conjunct Neptune than we will with Pluto. And it feels like with the Pluto in conjunct, you could take advantage of something that you've done in the past and you can rediscover it. Oh, hold on a second. Someone's calling me from Australia. Um, and I feel like it's important because if you don't, then you're stuck with this Venus in conjunct with Neptune. Right. So there's something here that you can resurrect. And if you do it, it's much better. Right. You can say, oh yeah, well, I found at least for a while. At least for a while. There's food here. There's some mana here. But when Venus continues to stay in that retrograde and in conjunct mode with Neptune, at the very least, you might be able to have a more creative relationship with it versus still being in this existential crisis. No pressure, right? You'll figure it out. Everybody has something. Everybody has something they've sort of left behind and can pick it up and dust it off. Say, oh yeah, I forgot about this. Yeah, I love this. This has some meaning for me. Um, Anything else? Yeah, there's a lot more. But we don't have forever. At least not today. Okay, let me get into the star of the day. So the star of the day is a special star of the day. The star of the day is my biological father. So today would have been his birthday if he was still around. And this is him when he was a young lad. And that's his grandmother, who in turn is my great grandmother. What do you want? You'll be the star of the day one of these days. I think she's upset that her porch friend is no longer here. So this, to me, this just kind of smacked of like, Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, and the family has a bit of the feel, right, from Arkansas, Louisiana, moving to California, Los Angeles area, and this is somewhere along the road. I think he's probably about 12 years old in this picture. But here's this chart. It's really interesting when you have a parental, a parent, and then you're into astrology, and you live with that person, right? And so their chart inside and out. I mean, really, this chart was a part of my life, right? And I can look at it both personally and objectively. And as an astrologer, I can tell you right now, it's a difficult chart, right? I mean, we got T squares galore here. Here's the Sun in Leo, Mercury at 29, Cancer, conjunct Pluto. He was a great listener, right? The guy was a great listener, hands down. And he had an interesting relationship with. He was a natural born psychologist. Like he could fucking figure you out in a heartbeat. Like he was one of the best people readers I've ever run across. And he could also like figure out how to fix things. Very Cancerian in that regard. I would call him kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, or maybe a few. I think there are a few that he was pretty good at. He was a consummate Leo in terms of his passions, right? His hobbies. I think he struggled. I think to find his way in the world, but he was good at so many things. And when I look at his chart, as an astrologer, with that true node in Capricorn in the fourth house, he was a pretty good jeweler. Like so, he's these rings that I wear, right? He made these rings and more, and had he pursued that, I mean, really pursued that with that true node in Capricorn in the fourth house, he might have been able to build a little bit of an empire in terms of being kind of an artist and an artisan and working out of the home, right, with Capricorn. The other thing that he wanted to get involved with, which I, at that time, didn't have any decision making power in the family, was he wanted to get into real estate. And I feel like with that true note in the fourth house, that would have been a good thing, right? Like that could have been something that on Capricornian level that he might have been able to master in a lot of ways. Um, Mars and Scorpio, Libra rising. He was a good looking guy. Mars and Scorpio, total catnip. Like, women were always hitting on my father with this Mars and Scorpio. And he's got his part of fortune there. And sextiling, right? He's got this moon in Virgo, kind of a new moon, super critical, very extremely hard on himself, right? But there's also this kind of artistic potential here with the sextile to the moon with Mars. And he was good at domestic stuff too. Like he could just fix shit. He was really good at landscaping and drawing plans out. And the guy was, kind of self-made, right? And what's always fascinating about this chart is Jupiter. I really learned about Jupiter in second house placements, both with him and my son, who both have Jupiter in the second house. And I don't think he ever made more than $45,000 or $50,000 a year, but he owned Mercedes, Cadillacs, boats, sailboats, power boats, you name it, right? Like he lived in a very wealthy kind of way. He had lots of things, and those things also kind of fed into his hobbies. And looking at that Jupiter in the second house, I'm like, yeah, of course, it makes total sense. A lot of it was created and built on credit, which is other people's money in Scorpio, but it's there, right? You can see it. He had a troubled father, and we have Saturn, Pisces, retrograde. And of course, we have this, a lot of times when we have a Saturn moon opposition in charts, you can see a divorce in the chart, right? And that's exactly what happened with his mother and his father. And this is back in the 1940s, and people really didn't get divorces in the 1940s, right? They really didn't do that. It's really unusual, but it happened. And his father, also known as my grandfather, right, who I never met the guy. He was an alcoholic, and he had a he had a challenging life, right? And it's Saturn in Pisces and retrograde, and living with really Saturn being the father, and the father just not being there, right? Moving all the way across the country, um, and then having a really challenging experience with his father and the inheritance of the father as well, and having to work, all this stuff out. And I think the biggest challenge for me was Mars, right? And the Mars Pluto square in his chart. And, I felt that Mars Pluto square. Trust me, it was intense. It was very intense. And it was kind of a heavy teacher for me in a lot of ways. And, you can just see here with Venus and Neptune in the 12th house, I really feel like he should have just pursued the path of being an artist, you know? And even here, with the sextile with Jupiter, that this is the area where his chart really could have blossomed and bloomed, and I feel like had he done that, had he really approached his life as an artistic and creative kind of endeavor, he probably would have had, I would say, more personal success in his what I would call professional life, right? Um, but a very intense chart, super super intense chart. And we look at placements and say, well, well, where am I? Right. Well, here's my Saturn right there on his IC. It's like, oh shit, I got to deal with this kid's Saturn. And it's like it's really interesting to see how these things work out. Like, so my moon and my Mercury are right here on his ascendant, right? And then we've got this T square going on in my chart, and in his chart, it's like, yow, right? It's like intense and sort of conflict based. And even my Pluto is opposite his Saturn. So we can see when you get into like the charts of your parents, you can see where the heat is, right? You can see where the fire is. You can also see where the gifts are. Because for me, his Mercury-Pluto conjunction and just being able to listen to me was, I mean, it worked both ways, right? Because he could see through my bullshit really easily. Like he had fucking X-ray vision, and that was uncomfortable. But on the other hand, he could also be incredibly empathic, compassionate, and find deeper solutions to some of my issues and problems, and I really appreciated that. Um, but to me, this is a difficult chart, and the lack of air, right? He's got the Libra ascendant, he's got Chiron in Gemini. What's interesting about his Chiron in Gemini in the ninth house is that he never went to college, but he was obsessed with learning. You know, he was just totally obsessed with learning, and he was an autodidact. And you know, he would read Shakespeare and he would read Sherlock Holmes. He was an avid reader. He was always trying to improve his game mentally, right? And I think it was something that he had to prove to himself because he didn't have a college degree, and he was just as smart as anybody who had a couple of initials behind their name, right? So just a super interesting chart, a challenging chart, very challenging chart. But he also had uh, uh, a mystic rectangle, and people have mystic rectangles. You can see it right here. They tend to land on their feet when things are tricky, right? So even when, and I could tell you some stories, but I'll leave them perhaps for another time, where he literally had like second and third chances in his life, and it's the mystic rectangle, I think, that is kind of a driver for that, you know, definitely kind of a driver to go through this, intense sort of crucible. But he didn't have any air in his chart. So when you have a lack of air, you have a lack of objectivity. It's hard to see yourself in an objective sense. You're really kind of under the water with all this water, right? Or you're burning with all the fire and desperately trying to find ground with the earth. I think it's a really interesting chart, not an easy chart, a chart that I know inside and out. And there you go. Star of the day, me padre. All right. So let's get back here and we'll stop the share. Here it is. All right. So wherever you are, I hope you make the most of this day. And if your day is nearly done, I hope you can sleep under this bright and luminous full moon, and that you're not too agitated. Um, Program your dreams with that Jupiter square, literally and figuratively. All right. If you are interested in hemp, CBD, we got to talk about True Hemp Science, who is a sponsor of the show. That's my buddy Chris, truehempscience.com. Pretty simple to remember, right? truehempscience.com. You go over there and you spend $100 or more, type in 15MINS, and guess what? You will get some free product goodies when you spend $100 or more. Great deal, totally great deal. $150 or more, get you free shipping, 30-day money back guarantee. And if you feel like talking to him, you can make an appointment and find out what CBD is right and best for you. So super, super value over on truehempscience.com. Go check it out. 15MINS is your checkout code. And what else? Oh, yeah, join me. 15 Minutes of Flame. People keep asking me, well, where is it? Where can I find you? It's pretty simple. I'll just bring it right up here. And we're good to go, man. I'm ready to rock and roll this morning. It's that Mars and Virgo right there. 9:11 a.m., 10:41 a.m. We got an hour and a half of news, views, synchronicities, high strange, you name it. That's where you'll find it. All right, mods, thank you for being here. Always appreciate your presence in my streams. Chatario, everybody else, wish you all the best. Much love under this Leo sun. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to save what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'll see you back here tomorrow for the Astro Weather.